Welcome back, everyone. I want to offer some words of Dhamma reflection, but before that, I will take homage and take refuge in the Buddha, pay homage to the Buddha. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato Arahato Sama Sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato Arahato Sama Sambuddhassa. Buddhang Dhammang Sanghang Namasami. A human body is fully an expression of nature. It's integral to the principles of nature. It is embedded nature. And the same is true for a human mind. Can can experience this in all sorts of different ways. And our experiences of our bodies and minds can be very can range very broadly. Right? People have all sorts of different and unique experiences in their own lives. So, so the body and mind can be a source of great pleasure, for example, whether that's with food or sex or dance, or the body can be a source of something of beauty. It can be a way of connecting. It can further life. It can bring forth laughter. There are all sorts of positive experiences that we can have. And then there are also a whole different range of negative experiences, difficult experiences of mind and body. So um, the body in particular can be a source of pain or discomfort, just physical discomfort. It can be a source of shame for many people, or a source of a reason for oppression. And it can be a way that we experience a lot of loss, whether that's loss of our faculties or loss of our loved ones. It can be a way of showing us our limitations, something that we really often don't want to connect with. Our limitations as human beings, physical and mental limitations. But somewhere in between that spectrum of the pleasant and the unpleasant in all those varying forms and more, there is body and mind as as an instrument of peace, instrument, a reservoir of a kind of wisdom that can reveal itself to us over the course of a human lifetime. So I'm guessing our theme for this weekend, as we've said a couple of times already, is what compels you to practice? What compels you to practice? And I leave that as an open question, or perhaps as a koan, but I want to share some thoughts around that. So I'm guessing that each one of you has a unique personal reason why you're here, why you happen to be online attending a meditation retreat this weekend, right now. Each one of you has probably a personal story about how you encountered the Dhamma. And these things relate to those experiences, those types of experiences that I was saying earlier. So maybe some wonderful person comes into your life, a intimate partner or a special friend, and that person introduced you to the Dhamma. Or maybe you heard some particularly resonant chanting, or saw a statue, or encountered a book that touched you in a way that other parts of your life hadn't up until that point. Or maybe it was a difficult, an unpleasant experience. Somebody in your life died, or you became ill yourself, um, and realized, and that brought forth some kind of urge to um, some kind of urge to look for the path of peace, the path of being able to make sense of that. And that urge, that questioning is sort of in that middle range of experience that I was talking about earlier, the kind of the search for meaning or the search for relief. All of that can be included in that spectrum of experience. So it's all related in a way to the experience of human life. And I want to point out right from the beginning that hopefully what you will hear me and Ayasachita mentioning over and over again over the course of these 2 days is that there is both a particularity about your personal experience, your particular body and mind, your particular practice, your particular karma, and there are aspects of our experience that are universal. We couldn't actually speak about the Dhamma or about a way, a path to liberation, unless there was some commonality across the human experience. So being able to turn toward both of those two perspectives, if you will, being able to explore both the uniqueness and the universality of your human experience is the way forward. It's not that we only focus on one side or the other. So, knowing that, if you approach your experience, whatever type of experience, right? Pleasant, unpleasant, or somewhere in between, as something to get rid of, as something that you reject, then that will lead to suffering. But if you approach the experience as something that you can turn toward in order to discover the principles that are manifesting here, then that will lead to liberation. It's not to say that sometimes we don't need to make a change in our life. Quite often we do need to make changes in our lives. Even physical changes or changes in our mental health and various other things that we need to address. It's not to say that we don't need to address things, but rather that until we arrive at that point of acknowledgement of what's present for us in all its individuality and all of its absolute nature, we're still not quite able to receive the full expression, to understand how we are the full expression. So the Buddha himself said, everything that you need in order to arrive at liberation is present within this human body. Any human body, no matter what illness or difficulty or disability or gender or sexual orientation or life experience you might have. And in fulfillment of that teaching, he gave us a number of frameworks, lots and lots and lots of frameworks. Um, Sometimes people talk about Buddhism as a practice of lists because the frameworks can be explained or explored in that way. But I want to suggest that each one of these frameworks that the Buddha gave us are really helping us to focus one bit at a time on aspects of the human experience and do that in a way that we can begin to unpack the mechanism. We can begin to see its process nature, as Santachita referred to earlier. So some of the frameworks that the Buddha has given us are the Anapanasati, the 16 steps of mindful breathing, the Satipatthana, the four foundations of mindfulness, which she led us in a guided meditation on that this morning, as Sanchita did. Meditations on the jhanas, so various states of immersion in very, very still mind. And many other frameworks within those frameworks. So if we look at the Satipatthana, for example, it goes through a series of different types of meditations within the bigger picture. So one particular framework that I want to put forth over the weekend here for us to start to investigate is the framework of the six senses. Six senses. So in Buddhism, a little different from the secular world, we talk about not five senses, but six senses. So there's seeing, hearing, tasting, smelling, touching, and then thinking, or you could say cognition, intellect, mind as a sense organ. So the eyes, the ears, the nose, the mouth, the tongue, the skin, etc., and the mind itself as a sense organ. So six sense bases. And the Buddha, for sure, we can be certain that the Buddha did not teach the six sense bases as a way to maximize one's pleasure in life. In fact, when he tells his own life story, he said he had, because he was a person of a lot of privilege, he had a tremendous amount of opportunity to try that avenue as a young man and realized that that didn't actually resolve his problem. His problem being that those things always come to an end, one way or another. They come to an end. Nor is it about crushing the body or crushing the mind or trying to achieve some sort of control. I think that very often people get confused by the Buddhist teaching and think that what we're talking about is a system of mind control. And that's actually also incorrect. The Buddha said very clearly in his second discourse, at least as it's understood in the Theravada, the second discourse that he ever gave, he said, about the mind, about consciousness, you cannot say, let my mind be like this or let my mind be like that. One cannot actually say that truthfully. We can train the mind. We can work with our tendencies of mind. We can do many, the mind is a very powerful thing, and we can learn how to work with it and how to cultivate it, how to evolve as spiritual beings. But ultimately, the path of practice is not about controlling either mind or body. That wouldn't be skillful. That's a losing proposition. I think actually that some folks also find that that's a point, a very deep shifting in their practice when they come to realize that they cannot actually control anybody. So what is the proposition? What is the proposition? A more skillful proposition, let's say, because you might all, again, have your own personal proposition in mind. But I want to say one very skillful proposition would be to the discovery of the principles of the body and mind, the discovery of the principles that are being expressed or that are manifesting in a human life. What's happening there? And I'm always pleasantly surprised and amazed at how congruent our teachings are when we come together and teach together like this, because we talk a little bit about what we're going to talk about, but actually Aya Sanchita and I don't coordinate that much, and yet she talked about these things that I wanted to bring up as well, like the incredibly vast and fleeting nature of what we discover when we are discovering these principles of a human body and mind. And we discover something about going beyond these boundaries. So the experience of impermanence, the Buddha actually says in the Balama Sutta, he holds up the experience of impermanence as being more spiritually valuable than all sorts of practices. I mean, he lists literally dozens and dozens and dozens of different practices. And he says all of these are beneficial in this way and beneficial in that way. But he holds up the experience, the direct experience. In many suttas, he calls it kaya pusitva, having touched it with the body, a visceral experience of impermanence. That can bring, I will tell you, can bring an incredible amount of relief, a deep peace, a deep knowing about human life, about your own human life. And it's interesting because it might not seem like it would, right? It might seem that the experience of impermanence can be difficult, could be painful, could be scary, could be any number of different things, could be going in the direction you don't want to be going, right? That might, you might associate that with some of the unpleasant experiences that I started about talking about. But the nature of the Buddha's teaching is that when we realize our inherent harmony with these principles, then that resistance, that confusion, that those efforts to control all of those other things, they drop away. That suffering over that drops away. And I would suggest that the part of the reason for that is because we go beyond our self-interest. In order to truly experience the principles, we have to go a little bit beyond, and perhaps far beyond, our personal self-interest. The push and the pull of aversion and attractive when we see the world through self-colored lenses. So on that note, I want to bring forth a teaching from one of the awakened women of the Buddha's time. So some of you may know that we just finished teaching a retreat hosted by Spirit Rock about a week ago on the Therigatha. So the Gatha means verses, and the Theri is the feminine form of elder in the Pali language, the ancient Pali language in which the Theravada teachings are preserved. And so these verses are from the women arahants of the Buddha's time. And there's some of the, I would propose to you that they're some of the most valuable teachings of our school. Our school is called the Theravada, and that's that the elders, the Vada or the path, the discipline, the way of the Thera, the elders. So the men and the women. Thera for is the masculine form, Teri is the feminine form, Pali. So this is a poem by Venerable Uttama Bhikkhuni, a second Uttama. So there were, as happens in modern times also, sometimes different people with the same Pali name. But in this case, this is another, the second Venerable Uttama Bhikkhuni. And I'll read you her poem. The entire path and all you will ever need to walk it, you will find inside. She says, quoting the Buddha, she says, so the Buddha taught me. The entire path, quote, the entire path and all you will ever need to walk it, you will find inside. End quote. So the Buddha taught me. Once I took a closer look, all the running around started to seem a little silly. Things changed so quickly, by the time I got anywhere, I'd be someone else. You are your mother, you are your daughter. One moment gives birth to the next. What we do is who we become. Beautiful. So again, she echoes this teaching from the Buddha. The path itself, the way to liberation, and everything you need in order to walk that way, experience that way, is fully here within this human body and mind. So she says, once I took a closer look. So what is she referring to there? She's referring to investigation. Mindfulness and investigation, the first two factors of the seven factors of awakening. Mindfulness and investigation. She's saying, I took a closer look. Just as we're doing this weekend, I hope. Taking a closer look. All the running around seemed a little bit silly. Looking here and there for somebody or something to give you the thing that will bring peace of mind. Or looking for the outer world to be different before you're ready to be happy, to be at peace with what is. The running around of the push and the pull. Things change so quickly, referring to impermanence, right? She had an experience, a deep visceral experience of impermanence. How fleeting, how fleeting. By the time I got anywhere, I'd be someone else. So even this thing that we believe is ourselves is shifting. It's shifting all the time. Are we ready to be with that? Are we ready to accept that in a wholesome way? Respond to that skillfully? You are your mother and your daughter, meaning she's here, the references to karma, right? So she's saying you were the cause of this thing that's here and the cause of the next thing. So I don't want to get too much into the description of karma there or the way that she's using this word you, because we don't really understand it in this way of like one person getting poured from one body into the next body. It's a different thing. But just to say, what she's saying is what you do has an effect on this next moment, right? And that's what she says. One moment gives birth to the next. So the message here from Venerable Uttama Bhikkhuni is Venerable the Teri, Uttama Teri, is what you do matters. Our practice, even within the scope of these vast principles, has an effect. what you're choosing to do in this moment will have an effect. Its effect will get embedded into the future. So what we do is we become. If we do the path of practice, then we become practitioners, and we become people who are on the path to freedom and peace of mind. We become students of reality, the reality that's expressed right here in our own personal body and mind. So the question before us for this weekend, I would propose, is how to do that, how to begin to even approach such a big, wide path as this. And for that, I brought my one and only prop. So I only have one prop that I ever use. So it must be my favorite because it's my only one prop that I use for Dhamma talks. And hopefully y'all can see this. I'll try to hold it up a little bit. But what I want to talk about is contact. So when we talk about the six senses, the reason why the six senses is a good place for us to begin our study is because that's where contact is happening. So the Buddha talked about contact as the convergence of three things. Is a sense organ, so let's say the ear, for example, is a sense object. So in the case of the ear, is a sound, like the sound of my voice or the bells. Okay, and it's a consciousness. So there has to be, if you're completely unconscious, or if you're there are various ways, even when we're asleep, for example, that we can be conscious of experience. But truly unconscious, one way that we can tell is that your body doesn't react to stimulation. So consciousness is present there, and when consciousness is present with a sense organ and a sense object, then those three things together create a contact. So this is a way of thinking about it. So what the Buddha said is, if I said that this is the eye, for example, and the light hits the eye, then there is a moment of eye consciousness. See that little light there? There's a moment of eye consciousness. And it's there for a moment, it's present, and it's changing while it's there, and then it goes away. Same thing with the ear. So the ear somehow receives a sound, and there is a moment, and it's changing while it's there, but it's present for some period of time, the ear consciousness, and then it stops and goes on to the next thing. Okay? Or you could say it's done, and then there is a next contact. And that's part of what's important for us to start to think about. That each and every moment that you're awake, that you are a conscious being, that is a moment of contact. Your sense organs are operating. Your skin is receiving the feeling of your clothes or the temperature of the room. Your ears are receiving. There's nothing that you actually need to even do for that to continue to happen. It's happening all the time. In fact, this is why boredom is kind of a funny thing, right? Because there is always stimulation happening, always. But there's some stimulation that we decide isn't enough fun, or isn't the kind that we're interested in, or it's too much like the last one, and then we say we're bored. But actually that's a very odd thing, because what's happening is each moment is a brand new moment of contact, and all the six organs are doing their function completely. So there is something, there is a practice opportunity embedded in that. There's a possibility for discovery that's fully embedded in that. And what happens is we gloss over it. We miss it most of the time. Most of the time. I'll tell you also a little bit of a story about when I was training in Japan. So I was at a monastery in Japan called Hoshinji, a training monastery in this little tiny fishing village. And it was the summertime, so it was very hot and muggy because it's a very humid climate there. And in the summer, we live in these very old traditional Japanese buildings with tatami mats, these kind of grass mats, and paper walls. And we were going to have a meeting. So that means that tatami mats and paper walls means it's the same temperature indoors as it is outdoors. Okay, when it's hot, it's hot. When it's cold, it's cold. So we were going to be having a meeting, and we were going into this meeting. We were going to have this meeting in this small room off the kitchen in the evening. And so, as part of our usual summer uh, uh, practice, we were given these fans, these little oval-shaped fans, blue on both sides, and then a little like white plastic frame and handle on it. Okay, so you can kind of visualize what I'm talking about. It's a little oval fan like this. It has a little handle. And that was our way of staying cool during the summer. So we were going to be having this meeting, and we were told, everybody bring your fans because we're all going to be sitting together in the same room, and it's hot and sticky. So, okay, we go, and I had set my fan down on my desk and noticed that it had all these little spots, these little white dots on the blue paper part of the fan. And I realized, just as I was picking it up to go to this meeting, I realized, oh, it's a picture of the night sky. It's a drawing of the constellations in that area of Japan, this blue paper with these little white dots on it. And I thought, wow, how ironic is that? We're instead of going and sitting outside under the night sky, we've got this, we're taking with us this concept of night sky that's printed on this fan. And we're going to sit there and fan ourselves with the concept of night sky that's on this fan. Okay, why not? Because that's what we do. So we're going to sit indoors, and we're sitting there, and I'm melting, really melting, because it's hot and sticky, and we're, in our monastic clothes. And I don't understand anything that's being said in the meeting because my Japanese, I speak very, very little Japanese. So basically, what's going on is just like a babble, a continual amount of babble that's happening in the meeting. So I'm kind of not really tuned into my hearing, my sense of hearing at all. And as I'm sitting there, I'm seated next to my fellow monk, Ryudo-san, and he starts fanning himself with his fan. And suddenly, he flicks the fan one way, and the whole thing goes white. It's not a blue fan anymore, and it's not a concept of the night sky or any kind of a drawing or anything. It's just whiteness. Like blazing, you know what I mean? Like blindingly white. And then flick, and he flicks it back in the other direction, and it goes back to being a fan and the constellations and the blue of the sky. And then flick, and he flicks it back again. And then again, all of that is obliterated. And in that moment, I thought to myself, oh, this is what we're talking about. That the principles, so in this case, the principle of luminosity of the fan was in there, and it just didn't actually come forth in a way that I noticed until Ryudo-san did that motion. And then, boom, everything about fan was gone. And there was only luminosity. But that was always there. And it's not like there's a bulb in the fan or anything like that, right? It's just the nature of how it is, what it is. So this is the way that through our practice, what I'm suggesting is the fan, the blue fan, and the light, the white fan, as an example of how our practice can bring forth aspects of our experience, the principles within our experience that we might not have ever seen before, even though they are right there. They're right there. But the conditions haven't quite clicked such that we can experience them until we practice. And through the practice, they can. So the underlying principles become more specific, become more part of our lived experience. And when we do this, and this is what's interesting also about contact or about the experience of the fan, what's happening is both an investigation of the internal and the external at the same time. It's not that we're even making that distinction anymore, right? When the contact happens, that's internal and external all creating this consciousness, this moment of the consciousness of that sense organ, that particular form or flavor of consciousness, if you will, of that moment and that particular contact. So it's the inner world and the outer world all embedded into a mechanism that we can begin to understand more clearly. So over the course of the weekend, I hope that we're going to investigate this more and more. We're going to use our six senses. So again, the eye, the ears, the nose, the tongue, and the skin, and the mind, okay, these six sense organs as instruments. Instruments for our practice, instruments for the discovery of the way. And they are that which is investigated. They are, so they are investigating, we're using them to investigate, and they are the thing itself which is being investigated. That right there is a pointer to a particular kind of Dhamma that can shift the way that you experience body and mind. So I hope that we will make the most of this opportunity. And I just want to leave you one more time with a poem by Uttamateri. She quotes the Buddha and she says, "The entire path and all you will ever need to walk it, you will find inside." So the Buddha taught me. Once I took a closer look, all the running around started to seem a little silly. Things changed so quickly. By the time I got anywhere, I'd be someone else. You are your mother, you are your daughter. One moment gives birth to the next. What we do is who we become. Thank you. So you have about 1 minute if you would like a standing break or a moment to look